On April 9th, 2024, Tucker Carlson conducted an interview with a Palestinian priest named Munther Isaac. Isaac, an evangelical Lutheran pastor who had spent his life as a dedicated theologian, was one of the very few Christian voices that people had heard from in the Middle East after the horrifying events of the October 7th attacks and the bombardment of Gaza from the Israeli government that happened afterwards. Being that our primary focus of the Middle East has been on Jews and Muslims, this was understandable. But yet no one had even cared to ask, what are the Christians in the region? No one seems to ask these questions when it comes to foreign wars, particularly in that region of the world. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, for example, there were 1.5 million Christians that lived in the country under the reign of Saddam Hussein. Hussein, a demonic and evil man who remains one of the great monsters of our time, was at least decent and smart enough, mind you, to not directly persecute the Christians in his land. He may not have liked them, and I bet that he didn't. But yet, in Iraq, they were safe. Until the United States came to town, foolishly, in the greatest foreign policy error America has ever committed, America overthrew Saddam's government. In our hubris, we thought this was a good thing. Women can wear bikinis. Gay people won't get thrown off roofs. We can put McDonald's in Baghdad. All good things for various different reasons in a vacuum, and almost everyone in principle agreed with them. Except for the Christians. Saddam Hussein, for all of his monstrous deeds, had enough respect for Iraqi Christians to not go after them politically. For all the names you could call him, and there are many names you can call Saddam Hussein, he wasn't a jihadist who wanted to persecute Christians. But this all changed when the people who replaced Saddam Hussein took power. Because power, as the old saying goes, abhors a vacuum. Someone will fill it. And inconvenient for all who ignore this truth, they will not take your thoughts into consideration about how they conduct their business once inside of power. The organization that filled the Iraqi power vacuum after the regime change conducted by the U.S. government of Saddam Hussein was the ISIS Caliphate. ISIS, actual radical jihadists who viewed all Christians as bastardized infidels, waged a very quiet war on Iraqi Christians. No one reported on this at all. Currently, estimates are that, due to them fleeing the country or being persecuted and killed for their faith, only 150,000 Christians remain in Iraq today, a 10x decrease from at the height of Hussein's power, whom everyone in our neocon media complex labeled as this generation's latest quote-unquote new Hitler. When analyzed across all world conflicts, this is the quiet part of all of them that no one likes to say out loud. When society descends into chaos, no matter where that chaos is, it is Christians, always, that pay the highest price. In Ukraine, for example, the current government, also installed by our government, waged a war against the Orthodox Church, the second largest denomination in the country, for being quote-unquote too aligned with the Russian government. Churches were shut down. Religious leaders were thrown into prison. On a stage at the Republican presidential primary debate in 2023, the only person to say something about this was Vivek Ramaswamy, a Hindu. All of the other quote-unquote Christians on stage, ranging from Chris Christie to Ron DeSantis to Nikki Haley, all had nothing to say. Point to any other part of the world in turmoil, and this is always the same trend. South Africa, Nigeria, Armenia, Myanmar, Syria, wherever. Political instability disproportionately harms Christians. This is not at all to say that Jews, Muslims, Hindus, or any other group are not harmed. They are, and it's terrible that they are. But yet the fact of the matter is that Christian persecution is never discussed with the concern or depth needed as other world religions. This is wrong, not just because it's Christians, mind you, and that I happen to proudly be a Christian, mind you, but because it would be offensive if this was any other group of people. Seemingly the only person in the media to notice this and to also take offense to it was Tucker Carlson, who bravely decided to say something about it. Palestine, Carlson thought, was no different than any other country's Christians. Having been on the site to the horrors of the Iraq War, Carlson was understandably averse to foreign conflicts of any kind, but particularly the devastation they caused to all in the wake of them. When Carlson spoke with Isaac, who also serves as a director for Bethlehem's Institute for Peace and Justice, it was the first time a major broadcaster had taken into account a Christian lens of the Israel-Palestine conflict. Isaac has, for his entire career, been a critic of the government of Israel for their mistreatment of Christians in the region, which had been heightened after the events of October 7th and Israel's response to it. 2 months after, at Christmas, Isaac had gone viral for his church's nativity scene called, quote, Church Christ in the Rubble, which had outraged people who were fervent supporters of the Israeli government. Quote, if Christ were to be born today, Isaac stated, he would be born under the rubble and Israeli shelling, end quote. Even after the initial blowback, Isaac did not back down. He continued to travel the world to speak at anti-apartheid conferences. He urged then-President Joe Biden on X to end the war in Gaza. Nowhere was this more true than his interview with Carlson. In their conversation, Isaac crossed what many had dubbed the uncrossable line. He accused Israel of committing a genocide in Gaza and rebuked America's Christians and the world's Christians for not doing as Jesus said to do and advocating for a peace and end to their suffering in the region, as he commanded in his Sermon on the Mount. Even for a Tucker Carlson interview, the after effect after this airing was, to put it mildly, explosive. Carlson and Isaac were both smeared as anti-Semites, labels they still carry today, similarly to people such as Candace Owens and Dave Smith, also professing Christians who had commented on this issue. Anyone, particularly any Christian, who had the nerve to question Israel's government, were tarred and feathered seemingly on the spot. This put an interesting twist on what was the most underrated parts and underreported parts of most of these people's champions, Donald Trump. Trump unquestionably has been the most pro-Israel president in modern American history. Trump, a person who highly valued loyalty and strong alliances, went to bat for Israel constantly. This, plus the fact that his daughter and her family were strictly both Jewish converts, put Trump strictly in the camp of supporting Israel by default. And this is not necessarily the wrong position to take, by the way. I'm a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. I believe that when the world ends, that is where Jesus is coming back to redeem the world and throw all the rest of the people into hell. If anyone should be in the camp of a Christian Zionist and supporter of Israel, it's a Bible-thumping evangelical Christian such as myself. This is my default position also. However, there's a caveat to this. A great explanation of this came from Charlie Kirk, another strongly supportive Israel defender and evangelical Christian. When on a college campus, Kirk was approached by a young man who wanted to join the military. That same young man, however, had reservations. How could he go to war for a country that supported things like abortion, transgender surgeries on children, the impoverishment of the working class, things that he and his values were diametrically opposed to? It was a good question. Kirk's response was the correct one. When you go to war, you don't go to war on behalf of your country's government, whose policies can change with the snap of a finger. On the contrary, you go to war on behalf of your country itself and the values and principles it holds. In essence, you must die on a hill for your values, for the permanent things, the things that the government has no right to trespass on in any form or fashion. Therefore, the position we should all take on any issue, but especially one this hot button, is the following. Nothing is by default. We must question everything. All alliances, strategies, structures, and institutions must be examined with unflinching honesty. If nothing is talked about in this way, then nothing ever gets done. This is not to say we should burn everything down just to burn everything down. That's stupid. But to say that nothing should be burned down, that all is just fine and dandy, is equally so as well. And the reality is, when you look into America's relationship with the current government of Israel, particularly in terms of foreign aid and intelligence, there is a lot of smoke to that fire. Why exactly do we give Israel so much money? A country is only sovereign if it can defend itself. Why is a lobby on behalf of a foreign government allowed to so heavily influence our politicians and fund their political campaigns? We'd freak out if it were China or Russia. Why is Israel in a vacuum any different? Why did the incoming Trump administration get so much cash from people such as Miriam Adelson, for example, who is heavily tied in with the Israeli government? Why is Palantir, the biggest black box tech startup in the world, whose technology is being used by the Israeli government to turn Gaza into a parking lot via drone technology, getting a blank check from Donald Trump to fuse all government data into a centralized location? These are all incredibly legitimate questions, particularly given the state of our own country. Los Angeles just underwent a civil war with foreign nationals waving foreign flags in one of America's most iconic cities while throwing Molotov cocktails into windshields of cars. A record number of fentanyl is still coming across our border. A national state of emergency has been declared about the level of homelessness across our various urban centers. Americans generally are still rightfully distrustful of every level of government, whether their preferred candidate is in office or not. The age-old question remains. Can we be truly America first, the agenda that Donald Trump promised his ever-loyal MAGA acolytes, if we prioritize the well-being of another nation above our own nation? The answer? No. An emphatic no. We have been so blinded by various outside influences and interests that America's near blind loyalty and bipartisan, mind you, support of the government of Israel has tainted our perception of it. Has anti-Semitism rapidly spiked, particularly online, since October 7th? Yes. Has there been crimes against people strictly because they are Jewish? Yes. Do Jews feel unsafe on college campuses because of their ethnic heritage and religious faith? I'm sure they do. These are all things to consider, obviously, because no American should feel this way, no matter who they are, what they look like, or how they choose to practice their religious faith. Yet these have been used as excuses as to us not being able to inquire into the basic facts of what is going on in the Middle East and how complicit America is in it. When we see a child blown to pieces on X or a hospital bombed on TikTok, we're told that what's in front of our eyes isn't actually happening. When we see a piece of old video or transcript about NATO led by the U.S. doing Israel's bidding to run roughshod over the Middle East, we're told to plug our ears and say la la la. When we are asked about hatred against Jews, how hatred against Jews is different from hatred against any other group, we're told we're bad people for even raising the question. This has quieted most people, which has allowed the trend to continue even further down the slippery slope. But now, almost 2 years after the horrific events of October 7th, people are finally starting to see the light. I should start by stating the obvious again. There are anti-Semites, such as Nick Fuentes to name one, out there. They are using this entire catastrophe both from a figurative and literal sense to gin up hatred against Jews. This is something that we as Americans should be against in every scenario. Hating Jewish people because they're Jewish is wrong. It has always been wrong. It will never not be wrong. That said, however, there is a reason why conspiracy theorists and legitimate anti-Semites are gaining traction. We didn't just get this rampant rush of anti-Semitism or any other form of hatred simply out of nowhere. Like any other scenario like it, it is a malicious case of cause and effect. The reason why this is happening, why everything around the entire Israel issue, particularly in the MAGA movement, is so crazy, is because of a lack of one thing. The one thing that keeps everything grounded. The truth. The absence of truth about the things that matter is the only reason things like conspiracies can exist. Whenever there is a lack of clarity about anything, there is always someone lurking in the shadows to take advantage of that opportunity, particularly when it comes to things as sensitive as the United States' relationship with Israel, for example, and Israel's actions in the West Bank. There is no room for error here. Things must be laid out plainly for people to see, or else there will be bad actors that seize on that opportunity to take advantage of that opportunity. And they have. The US-Israel relationship and everything that has gone south recently has been the biggest self-inflicted wound the MAGA movement has suffered in its history. It has the potential to completely tear it apart, to stall all positive momentum that this populist nationalist movement has going for it. If it does, it will be the biggest wasted political opportunity in a century. We cannot allow it to happen, come hell or high water. But to do so, we must begin to have an honest conversation about America's government and its relationship with Israel's government. Half-baked conspiracy theories and truths will no longer do it for people who have been devoid of both for so long. Without the full, unvarnished truth about the US-Israel relationship, we cannot forge a relationship that is built on good, healthy boundaries, respect, and trust. If it gets ugly, good. That is what must be done if the truth is to reign supreme. I have dubbed this problem, not just with Israel, mind you, but with the lack of truth throughout our institutions, as the conspiracy death spiral. The conspiracy death spiral, put simply, is what our country has been enveloped in for the last 5 years. Is systemic racism actually real? Was the 2020 election stolen? Was COVID a bioweapon? Is Elon Musk running the government? Is Benjamin Netanyahu controlling Trump like a puppet? None of these are constructive conversations in a healthy society, but there is a reason we're having them. That reason, the truth and the lack thereof, is the only reason as to why these vast gulfs are allowed to take place within our country between what is actually going on and what other, more self-interested parties simply want to be true. We cannot run a country this way. We must accept that and do everything we can to fix it. But it's not just the truth. We know we'll never get the full version of that, unfortunately. What's more harmful, and why so many conspiracies, both true and untrue, are allowed to run wild, is that this lack of truth has all but infected our institutions. Our institutions have become so poisoned by lies that no one can rely on them anymore for getting people any sort of truth. And this is a catastrophe and something we should be absolutely furious about. With no cultural institutions to uphold credibility, we have no leg to stand on when it comes to any sort of truth, which is what is leading to our conspiracy death spiral. If our government and its surrounding institutions can't even tell us the truth about whether or not Israeli intelligence is infiltrating our government, or why Jeffrey Epstein was able to obtain access to his wealth, or even on the effects of fluoride in our teeth and in our water, why should we expect it in any other vein of possibility? It is not anti-Israel to say that I don't want Israel influencing my government and my country. It is not anti-Semitic to say that turning Gaza into a parking lot is immoral. It is not coded Jew hatred to say that taking out the Ayatollah is bad for American interests. These are the truth, and these are facts. It's about time we start speaking them, and loudly.